It's important that we mimic what our primal ancestors were doing thousands of years ago, which is exactly why I don't read.
Exactly. I'm done. I'm going to burn all the books, tear down the shelves, and become the village idiot. I will make more money, get laid more, and live a happy, ignorant life. If you love Cormac McCarthy but hate modern culture, this video is for you. Today we will be tracking Cormac McCarthy's resistance to modernity by analyzing aspects of his novels and examining statements he's made in past interviews. So one might describe McCarthy as a Luddite. And when you're dealing with Luddites or proto-Luddites, you have to be weary to not romanticize them too much. People like me who are under 30 don't remember a reality without the internet. So the fantasy or the dream of being able to live in the woods and reject society and just write novels or be an artist is very compelling to us. Yet those fantasies cloud our judgment in terms of evaluating McCarthy for who he really is. And today I'm really trying to build some axiomatic thoughts based on the facts of McCarthy's life. So it may be easy to assert that McCarthy is anti-technology, that he's anti-progress in what's happening right now. But if you look at his work at the Santa Fe Institute, he has to be immersed in technology at some level. In 2005 with the Vanity Fair, he said that he didn't own a computer. And I know that he corresponds with some scholars over letters and doesn't use email. And they are writing a lot of stuff to each other. So that seems somewhat Luddite. But McCarthy, when the internet first came on the block, was in his late 60s and his early 70s. If you've ever tried to introduce your older grandparents to technology, you know how hard it may be. And that's what McCarthy was really doing. And so he seems to use technology for the utility of understanding scientific information, because scientific information today, a lot of the time, is presented on the computer, whether that be biology, through statistics, or physics, or whatever. A lot of it's happening with models on computers. So if McCarthy is interested in the progress of science, it's 100% tethered to technology. If you listen to the interview that Cormac McCarthy gave, a lot of the fields of the social sciences, humanities, and sciences that he cares about are very tech-driven. So where does this resistance to modernity come from? And it starts with McCarthy from not a rejection of the infrastructural, architectural, or technological process, but rather the humans who are embodying it and what those are doing to the humans. Because McCarthy was born in 1933 in Blount County, Tennessee. Excuse me, he was born in Rhode Island, and in 1939, though, he moved to Tennessee. And he got to see the end of a massive transformation from a very isolated and rural area to a place where factories and mining companies and big businesses were overtaking the area. And as I'm sure you guys know, that changes the people, that changes what's happening, and it also destroys and influences the environment. Now with all the, the rampant environmentalism and people, engaging in shock culture, environmentalism may sound a little bit goofy, but for someone like McCarthy, who is very interested in the sciences and animals and his dog and taking walks, watching the environment get destroyed and people who were farmers and just rural people getting by get kicked out or have to change their lifestyle and have to go work probably was a lot for him. And he had, older people around him who remembered a time, like even his father, that had no technology, not even a radio. So on a human to human level and on an environmental level, McCarthy has been a witness for his entire life. He witnessed the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 90s. And he, as we know, is an artistic and genius type person in terms of his intellect and creativity. So he was someone who would absorb these things. He once said that he, and told someone that he listens to people talking in public to figure out conversational stuff for his dialogue. So this anti-modernity, this anti-progress that McCarthy fronts in his novels and in his interviews the rejection of most publicity and press is 100% people oriented. He just gave 2 interviews on film and over an hour each for both of them. But they were with scientists and people he cared about. He would give a print. He didn't care about the cameras. He said, do what you need to do, get me hooked up, it's all good. So that's one of the first, myths that we have to destroy here. If McCarthy was a young man right now, with his talents and abilities, he would be engaging with technology. So I'd like to read you guys a quote from a McCarthy interview in 1992 now. And the quote starts with him saying that there is no such thing as a life without bloodshed. Sorry to all my vegans out there, #vegan cats, keep your fat cats vegan. quote continues saying, "I think the notion that the species can be improved in some way, that everyone can live in harmony, is a really dangerous idea. Those who are afflicted with this notion are the first ones to give up their souls, their freedom. Your desire that it be that way will enslave you and make your life vacuous." So McCarthy is rejecting the notion of utopia with a capital U that we always talk about on this channel, and sometimes I'm peddling. I've had utopia afflictions before, but most people with their utopian afflictions have them tethered to a political reality, to a politician or to a party or some piece of legislation. And anyone who studied history before has seen that when people become too afflicted with creating the perfect reality very fast, that's when you get communism and other problems. It's also when you get the American dream and manifest destiny and all the colonization and problems that came from that, and the neediness to just move fast, and our need to perform manifest destiny and to colonize required us to actually give up freedoms as Americans. We had to transition to more of a republic and eventually an empire to continue our growth. And so with this statement and the rejection of utopia, McCarthy actually has an implicit advocacy for governance, because if you reject utopia, all right, we can't fix this isn't going to go anywhere, nothing can really be done, then you either have to accept that we need to live in the anarchism of the road, or you need to advocate for some form of governance. And that's just A plus B equals C. Yet in McCarthy's novels, this is a major theme. If you look at The Crossing, it takes place in 1949, but other than 3 scenes or so where there's like a truck or a road, it could have taken place in 1870. When you examine McCarthy's general theory with his novels, he presents these nostalgic novels with these male characters that are rejecting progress and searching for the American exceptionalism or the old times, and trying to exert some form of autonomy back onto their reality. When you look at Billy Parham in The Crossing, for the next minute we'll probably be spoiling The Crossing, so skip ahead. Billy Parham wants to regain some form of autonomy in his environment with him, as a man, by sending the wolf to Mexico. And that act of autonomy, first of all, doesn't save the wolf, and sets off a chain of events, because when he takes the gun, his family isn't able to survive. The horses are also stolen. So when he comes back, him and Boyd once again want to reclaim some form of autonomy, and they go on this wild western type journey, but Boyd ends up dying. And then the crossing keeps happening, and he keeps doing it. And the core of this, though, is that there is no justice. Billy is what he needs most from the start. He needed justice. He needed some form of governance to take care of that wolf, to figure out what to do with the red wolf, because people were just killing it. He needed someone to go after the horses and to avenge the men that killed his brother and all this stuff. But there was no justice, especially down in Mexico. Down there, it was speaking about the themes that kind of get shown in All the Pretty Horses in the City of the Plains, of this outlawedness. But when you create a novel that is terrifying with The Road or Blood Meridian, with these outlaw figures, once again you put it into this dialect where there's anarchy on the other side there is innocence and peace. And so us automatically as readers and as people want peace. We see that and we're like, oh my god, that sucks. But McCarthy kind of takes this weird nihilistic stance that this is all that we have, but then he always adds the thread of hope in there. But he basically says there will always be bloodshed, and this is a very penetrating and scientific view. And I don't know if anyone out there is a fan of Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative? It's a very fast theory book. Everyone should check it out. But in this, he talks about dark capital. And that's the concept that capital penetrates all aspects of life. My parents live up in Wyoming in a very small town. And even while I'm up there in the middle of the woods, I'm still affected. I see, I'll hear trucks or gunshots or see trash. No matter where you go, you're in America, you're still very affected by progress, by modernity. And in Cormac McCarthy's first novel, The Orchard Keeper, a lot of the characters yearn for this time. It takes place right in 1939 when this transition was happening. And there is this dark capital that's invading the organic, that's demolishing the organic. And with the only thing that stops this, though, and I got this idea from Ty Hawkins' paper called Cormac McCarthy's Resistance to Modernity. He talks about how what stops, this is mind-blowing stuff, what stops the progress and Cormac McCarthy's novels is violence. In The Orchard Keeper, violence happens, but it stops the oncoming people or the oncoming progress. In the novel The Outer Dark, a very similar playbook, in even Child of God and Outer Dark, a very similar thing is happening. Lester Ballard is killing young people and random people, and the police can't do anything about it. They can't find him in these caves. They don't know what to do with him. He is the archetypal evil character that the sheriff has to hunt in No Country for Old Men, but there is no hope for the sheriff. The whole story is hope. We are yearning that the sheriff can, find his autonomy back again. But at the end, we get the negative arc and the realization that he can't do anything, that the world is just too nasty and crazy now. And this is one of the reasons that people say McCarthy kind of takes this nihilistic tone, that this modern culture is not a good thing. And one of the first big examples for McCarthy making this push is Suttree. And at the very start of Suttree, it says, quote, "Wave on wave of the violent and the insane, their brains stoked with sporeless analogues of all that was. Leanarians with their abrogate Semitic chapbook reenacting the dramas and the parables therein, and mindless and pale with a longing that nothing save dark's total restitution could appease." Suttree in the novel came from wealth, came from power, came from a family moving toward modernity, and he rejects that. And in so doing that, he also rejects the Enlightenment principles. Once you have this knowledge, he's rejecting all of that and moving back within the city. But it's odd that he's doing that because he embraces this idea of laziness, even though I guess he's a huge fisherman, but he starts hanging out with criminals and drunkards and these types, which isn't exactly a rejection of modernity. He's just viewing that as the lesser of two evils. He understands that by living this life, though, that he can remain an individual, because modernity wants us to reduce us to the functions of machinery or systems. They want us to be cogs in the wheel. And by riling up his crowd of friends and being this kind of leader for them, he is helping hold this ideal of the non-working man. And this continues today. This is obviously romanticized still today. We see the guy and he's does firefighting in the winter, in the summer, then he takes the rest of the winter off and just kind of drinks and rambles around. Or the person who rejects things and lives out in the woods and lives this rural lifestyle. That's kind of embodying the same thing, that these machines, these things, these jobs won't mold me and take away my autonomy. But before we go back to Suttree, that this is the wrong notion, that we should not be rejecting society, because the solutions are not an aggregist one. They are not from going primitive again. We can't send people back there. We have to give them the incentives to embrace the golden rule. Do not initiate violence upon others. We need to give them the incentives to educate themselves, to reach that level, and then, to obviously build on that. And the internet and technology and even modern culture is the greatest vehicle ever known for that. We have existed for eternity in violence. And the world is finally coming into connectedness. I heard something, this may not be true, that only 20% of the world is actively on the internet. There's a whole group of people in the world who aren't that active on the internet yet, who, if the general messaging and themes of our society were at some level unified and good, would create a wave of positive action and emotions that this world has never been able to see. And instead, obviously, modern culture is not using that. We're wasting it or doing the opposite, outright causing negativity, drama, shock, whatever. But just to talk about that Luddite notion that people romanticize, you are basically giving up on life, and it doesn't feel good. I was once in this position. At one point in my life, I would have been, and still could, I guess, live in my parents' basement in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming, work a random part-time job or do some freelance work online. And I could wander the woods and do nothing. And I did that for a while. But when you reach a certain level of consciousness, you know that you have to contribute to the world, that you have something to give. And that if you don't do that, then you're just living a lie. Once you resolve enough of your own problems, the next step after resolving your own problems is to always give, is to always help, is to maybe help others reach that level or reach some level. And so that's just a quick reminder before we get back into Suttree, that modern culture is a medium, and it's a very strong medium. And culture and technology is just this medium, and we're using it wrong. All it takes is a couple small shifts in priorities and goals, and we could be living a much worse or much better reality. And the only way to take part in that conversation is to participate online. If you aren't here, then you are serving a lot less people than you could, because your in-person life can only serve a small amount of people. And that's what's actually very sad about the novel, and as a writer, that I will have a much larger impact with speaking and helping people on YouTube and other platforms than I will with my writing. Even though I've dedicated my life to being a writer and I've spent more time writing than working on speaking at all, it's just funny because the novel is still the most complicated form of art, in my opinion. But speaking of responsibility, Cornelius Suttree in Suttree is told by his father that the world is run by the people who are willing to take responsibility for running it. But that is kind of a double-edged sword, and Suttree rejects this notion, and it's actually correct, because the people who actually step up and take responsibility for running other people's lives inherently have issues because they view that they have the power to exert their moral authority and their vision upon others. But connecting this to a spiritual principle, unless you take power, then you will be subjected to other people's power. So it's beautiful that Suttree uses his power, though, in a different way. He rejects the idea of taking responsibility and becoming a lawyer or a doctor. Instead, he works as a fisherman. He activates himself, and he's unlike his friends. He is generally a somewhat responsible person. He attends his son's funeral, even though he knows he's gonna get a lot of crap, and he got ran out of town and they're beat up. But Suttree returns to the spirit, which is at some level the realest thing of all that you can always discover. This is what the India and the yogis found out, that there is an infinite source of love and energy within. And for everyone out there, that's where it needs to start. If once you realize and find your own power and clear the cobwebs and take your own organic journey, that's when you exert yourself in the world. And it's very sad that people can't take the journey that Suttree took, or even the characters in the Border trilogy took, where they got to spend this time alone with realization, with growth. Instead, we go from high school to college to the job, and then at 30 years old, you wake up and you're like, dude, I hate my life, I hate my wife, what am I doing? And that's obviously why festivals and modern culture is creating the simulacra of the organic. You know, when you look at a festival in Burning Man, and even music, electronic music, anything with a boom clap beat is imitating the African percussion or trance-oriented music. If you look at houses and landscaping, these are all trying to mimic nature and dress and even the actions of individuals. They're trying to restore this because they know it's been lost, and it's now cool, it's now trendy to try and act like you're restoring this through a simulacra. Even worse, nature is now being exploited with those simulacras by, I was at Grand Teton National Park not too long ago, and I was at, this very nice spot, and people just kept coming and taking photos and not even observing it. And I understand that's a thing, but they were just getting the photo, but not the memory, not the experience. And then exploiting that so that people believe that they actually are searching for the organic. And that's probably one of the reasons that McCarthy feels a little bit weary about doing interviews, that his words, his statements, and his thoughts on his books will just be turned into a simulacra and reproduced by scholars and by people. That's what this channel is right now. He's already done it by creating the simulacra of a story. And so now it opens us up. But the more that you give, the more that it's opened up to interpretation. So McCarthy creates Suttree, as Ty Hawkins' paper says, as a novel of preservation. He's trying to preserve and maintain the organic. And McCarthy tries to hold this in his personal life also. And as we all should, no matter where you were going, if you've experienced and understood the organic, you once again can't go back. You need to try to reject it. However, McCarthy takes a very hard-lined approach and says that the preservation with Suttree does not work. The preservation that we see any character try to create in their novels doesn't ever work. McCarthy makes it hard because he understands, as we saw with that quote earlier, moving back, that absolutism does not exist. Believing that nature, that we can preserve this identity or preserve this form of innocence or Edenic mindset is fallible. And he says, quote, "There are no absolutes in human misery, and things can always get worse." So it's a losing battle for the characters in Cormac McCarthy's novels, which is such a genius move because it creates implicit tragedy. It helps, as we talked about in the video about why Cormac McCarthy writes dark novels, it's because he believes that they work a lot better. And it's true that he's a good enough writer that he could, what if Suttree was just more positive and there was a happier ending or moved in a more positive arc? It would still be a masterpiece, but would it have that weight? Would it sit there and make you think? In The Crossing, like The Crossing is just tragedy after tragedy. If those don't happen, it's just a random book with some people walking around. Or if they go there and the wolf gets to Mexico and he just lets it off, would that have changed your life? Would that have shook your soul like it did? So does McCarthy believe this though about his reality, that it's just totally devolving? You could, because in his statement with Vanity Fair in 2005, he called Santa Fe a theme park. And Santa Fe isn't that big. To my knowledge, Santa Fe maybe has 100,000 people, not more than 200,000. And out where McCarthy lives, he's basically out not close to that many people. However, he sees the people who have embraced the simulacra too much, who have gone too far, who are ruining this preservation effort that he imagines, that we all imagine. Like I keep saying McCarthy, but I imagine a world where I don't have to deal with this every single day. Something that the ideal world. Last but not least, of course, we have to talk about The Passenger and Stella Maris. Those whole novels are a rejection of modernity. McCarthy explicitly states that the nuclear bomb was the cause of the destruction of our society and the bringing on of modernity. You know, once again, when he was 12 years old, this is a very significant event in his consciousness. But when we examine Bobby Western, the downfall of the Western family was physics, was the Manhattan Project, was the absolute nature of that decision of his father, of going 100% in and not caring about his his daughter and son anymore. But that's what modern culture does. That's one of the symptoms of modernity, that to become a man, Oppenheimer or Einstein, you have to become obsessed. Bobby Western and Alicia both reject modernity and technology and progress for love, for each other, for this idyllic time. Alicia, in part, must be inspired by the physicist McCarthy has been talking about in multiple of his interviews and in Stella Maris. Can someone put his name down in there? The one that just outright quit and moved into this little cabin house in France and became a goat farmer. There's this idea of quitting, of going back, that McCarthy kind of knows about and can play with, but then all he has to do for his novel is just then turn that into something negative. Someone who can't handle it, who has a mental illness, who goes off the deep end when they are confronted with the weight of physics and then tries to leave, but then what if it follows you? And that's, you know, at some level what the plot of The Passenger is. Alicia can't stop and can't handle it, and then the trauma follows her, which wraps Bobby into the web. And we can't, you know, you could even say that Bobby is so interested in Alicia because he could have a savior complex or wants to save her, and then in that process of wanting to save her, sexual feelings manifest. But that's a whole other topic about why those two are in love with each other. So obviously we haven't talked too much about what modern culture is, but you already know. I don't need to get on here and do a political talk show and be like, everything's going downhill. You know, you can go to the grocery store and start to see some cracks. But if there was anything I missed, please let me know. And if you want to check out my new video where David Foster Wallace, one of the American greats, talks about Cormac McCarthy, go check that out right over here.